Pay close attention. What you're about to see is Bible prophecy being fulfilled.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you news as it relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Israel Hawkins. Well, Jeff, every week in the news, we're seeing the momentum increase with the decline of morals in today's world. We're going to talk a little bit today about the vandalism that took place in New York, the Jewish Deli. We're also going to mention, see the effects of a love growing cold, of course. More protests are taking place throughout the Middle East and other places throughout the world. And also we're going to see some of the things taking place coming from the Roman Catholic Church and its continued abuse coming to light. Now let's first look at New York. A Jewish deli is ransacked by vandals right before the high holy day of Rosh Hashanah. Now, vandals spray painted obscene sayings on the walls, broke computers, light fixtures, televisions. They destroyed leather seats, dishes, and they urinated all over the establishment. Now, owner David Ruggiero found the mess Wednesday morning. Ruggiero is not Jewish, but his 92-year-old business partner is.
Now, customers were shocked that such a thing would take place after what seemed to be progress in recent years. Now, still, the New York Police Department suspects that prejudice wasn't the main motivation here, but burglary was. Now, workers hope to complete repairs in time for a weekend reopening, but of course, they're going to be adding surveillance cameras.
It's like that ripple effect of an immoral character. Now, another act showing the love of this world growing cold, Swedish police are disturbed by what they saw on security footage from a Stockholm train station. Now, the footage shows a 38-year-old drunk man falling onto the train tracks. Next, a passerby notices the unconscious man lying on the tracks.
But instead of helping him, the man steals his valuables, then left him there on the tracks to be hit by an oncoming train. Now, police have released the footage of this video in hope of identifying the robber. Meanwhile, the victim who has survived had to have his foot amputated.
Amazing. One of the latest twists coming out of the Middle East, hundreds of protesters have stormed the compound of one of Libya's strongest armed Islamic extremist groups. The target was the administrative center for the Ansar Ansarihi militia. The protesters were heard shouting, "No to militias." Now, these militias, of course, began to grab power after the death of longtime dictator Muammar Gaddafi. Some speculate that this protest may be backlash from the death of the American ambassador to Libya, Chris Stevens.
Now, Chris Stevens, who was widely popular among Libyans for his work during and after the revolution. Now, his death was viewed as a tragedy both in the U.S. and in Libya.
Demonstrations took place this week in Pakistan over the U.S. film that insults the Prophet Muhammad. Now, we talked a little bit about that last broadcast. In the city of Karachi, they chanted, "Any friend of America is a traitor." In Islamabad, the capital of Pakistan, demonstrators fought with police as they headed toward the U.S. Embassy. They also burned the U.S. and Israeli flags as part of their protest.
Now, Pakistan has issued two separate statements, one that condemns the film, another which condemns the recent killings of U.S. Embassy staff last week in Libya.
A little farther east, anti-Japanese sentiment has risen in the last week after Japan announced it was buying disputed islands in the East China Sea. Some of the demonstrations turned violent, with protesters attacking any establishment associated with Japan. Japanese companies like Canon and Panasonic have suspended operations in China until further notice. China has become a global manufacturing hub, and its government prides itself on keeping costs low to continue to attract foreign investors.
Now, this year, Japanese investment has increased 16% over last year. Consumers think that shutting down production in China is not a great idea, and people will stop using the Japanese brands. But despite a long, troubled history between them, China and Japan have developed a mutually beneficial trade relationship. The two are now the largest economies in the region, and the last thing that either of them want is a rupture between them that could potentially damage them both.
The U.S. Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta is in the region to meet with leaders in both countries, including China's leader in waiting, Xi Jinping. China has now assured Japan it will protect its business interests. But anti-Japan protesters are still protesting in China, and as long as that goes on, there's only so much that China's government can do when geopolitics become clouded with emotions.
Now, turning our attention now to matters over east, pressure is continuing to mount between Iran and its rivals. Now, just recently, a major development has upped the ante one notch closer to war.
YPN's Larry McGee has our report. Larry, what's the atmosphere like over in the Middle East?
Commotional, Katan, and every bit as tense as it has been for quite some time now. And this week, in an escalation, an enormous show of naval strength amassed off the coast of Iran in what is being identified as one of the largest military exercises that region has ever seen. The demonstration of force, conducted near the Straits of Hormuz and led by America and Britain, follows a recent increase in war rhetoric on behalf of Israel and is being hailed as yet another stronger pang, signaling the inevitable birth of armed conflict with Iran. This week, 25 nations participated in a 12-day exercise, making up the largest military game the Iranian expanse has ever witnessed. This comes amid many fears that Israel is preparing to launch a preemptive strike against Iran's alleged nuclear program, which Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu asserts is only 6 to 7 months away from achieving 90% of what it needs to produce a bomb. Iran, however, staunchly denies that allegation, and if attacked, it is promising revenge targeted across the eastern expanse. Back west, the former Liberal Democratic Defense Minister of Britain, Nikki Harvey, is revealing that his being fired as of late was a political maneuver designed to avoid a coalition split over the issue of Britain's participation in a possible preemptive strike on Iran. Harvey says that he was fired in order to facilitate the Deputy Prime Minister signing on to an American-Israeli preemptive strike on Tehran. For onlookers, the former minister's removal provides an interesting glimpse into the political dynamics which paved the way for war, and as the clamor for confrontation grows more urgent, his dismissal furnishes a prime example demonstrating how those who don't agree with the preemptive strike on Iran are clearly being replaced by those who do. For YPN News, I'm Larry McGee. Katan, Jeff, back to you.
Doesn't sound like things are getting any better anytime soon. In the state of Victoria, located in southern Australia, more than 600 children have been abused by Catholic priests since the 1930s. The Archbishop of Melbourne gave those figures in a statement to a parliamentary inquiry and described this abuse as horrific and shameful. Now, campaigners, on the other hand, against child abuse say the numbers of victims could be as much as 10,000.
Now, they believe the number of victims to be much higher than the reported 600 due to the history of the Catholic Church covering up their child sex abuse problem. Now, as an example, when a scandal in Belgium was revealed that involved 300 victims, the former head of the church advised one of the victims not to go public with his abuse. Also, in Ireland, reports have uncovered thousands of victims were abused as the Catholic Church once again tried to cover it up.
Chrissy Foster is one of the many campaigners against Catholic child abuse living in Melbourne in the state of Victoria. She believes that the Catholic Church has admitted to the abuse only because the Australian Parliament is now looking into this problem.
When she was asked why the campaigners believe the number of victims to be closer to 10,000, she said, well, given the number of offenders in the state of Victoria, we're looking at about 119 offenders, and that's just Victoria. That's not the rest of Australia. They have similar numbers. And given the fact that each pedophile can have up to 110 to 117 victims, then that's where the figure comes from.
Amazing. She went on to say some of these pedophiles, one in particular, he admitted to his family after he was arrested that he had hundreds of victims. And the offender for our children, she continued, he was very similar. He was sexually assaulting, raping children for 50 years. So we're talking about a lot of children. Now, all these priests, they have access to primary and secondary schools. In each of these schools, they have anywhere from 300 to 400 children there. And they're also in charge of the parishes as well.
Now, Chrissy Foster was also asked if this admission by the Catholic Church makes a difference to her family. Well, she responded, well, this is entirely too late for my family. 2 of our 3 daughters have been sexually assaulted for some years when they were at primary school. Very young children, she said, and it just ruins their life. It's mind-altering, and it affects the way they live.
Yeah. Mrs. Foster, continued, our eldest daughter, Emma, she died in 2008. She was 26 years of age, and she took her own life. Now, she had a dreadful life up until then, and she suffered greatly from the effects of this abuse. Our second daughter, Katie, she took to drinking, and she was hit by a car when she was drunk. She was in the hospital for a year, and she still requires 24-hour care, and that was 13 years ago.
Wow. So it's horrendous effects, she said, and getting this inquiry will not help us. But I speak out so that other children do not have to suffer what my children have suffered. This is a crime. It should not have happened at all. The church has been covering it up for decades, centuries, she said. Now, Katan, it's sad to see how many lives have been ruined by the Catholic Church. But thankfully, Yeshua Hawkins has been teaching the truth concerning the Holy Scriptures and offering both hope and healing for all those whose lives have been devastated by the Catholic Church. Call or write the House of Yahweh today and request your free copy of the Prophetic Word magazine and monthly newsletter.
And you can write the House of Yahweh at P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas 79604. You can also call them at 1-800-613-9494. And for all calls outside the United States, please call the number on your screen. Up next is Yeshua Hawkins teaching Yahweh's Way. For all of us here at YPN News, I'm Jeffrey Heimerman. And I'm Katan Alexander.
Thanks for joining us.